We have been working on a project about two texts, where one of them is a poem by Langston Hughes and the other is a short story by Hemingway. We are going to start with a quick presentation about the two writers, and after we're going to talk about the two texts, and lastly we're going to give comparisons to the two texts, where we include a third poem by Robert Browning. But first, the two presentations.
Portrait of Langston Hughes. His full name is James Mercer Langston Hughes. He was born February 1st, 1902, and he died May 22nd, 1967 at age 65. He was an African-American poet, social activist, novelist, playwright, and columnist from Joplin, Missouri. Hughes had a very poor relationship with his father, with whom he lived in Mexico for a brief period in 1919. Upon graduation from high school in June 1920, Hughes returned to Mexico to live with his father, hoping to convince him to support his plan to attend Columbia University. Portrait of Hemingway. His full name was Ernest Miller Hemingway. He was born July 21st, 1899, raised in Oak Park, Illinois, and he died July 2nd, 1961. On a plane to Africa, Hemingway was almost killed in two successive plane crashes that left him in pain or ill health for much of his remaining life, and later on, he bought a house in the summer of 1961 where he committed suicide. He had 4 wives and 3 children. Hemingway produced most of his work between the mid-1920s and the mid-1950s. And won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1954. He published 7 novels, 6 short stories collections, and 2 non-fiction works. Hemingway's technique can be called iceberg techniques because only the top is visible, but the reader has to read between the lines to understand the meaning of the poem. The reader can see, smell, and feel what he's reading, as if you were present yourself.
I want to talk about the poem from Langston Hughes, and it's called Suicide's Note. It consists of 3 simple lines and only 12 words. The point of view is seen from the lyric speaker, whom is either a man or a woman. The whole poem is made up on this metaphor, and Langston Hughes uses personification when he describes the river. It's giving human features, for instance, a face and being able to ask for something. The metaphor makes the river seems like a real person, and that supports the fact that the lyric speaker the river and wants to kiss it. And the title of the poem is Suicide's Note, but it doesn't give us a sad feeling. And the tone of the poem is more relaxed and calm, and a calm way of expressing the need to commit suicide. Also, the fact that the river asks the lyric speaker to kiss it shows that it's completely up to him or her, because it isn't a demand but rather a choice.
I want to talk about the short story by Ernest Hemingway, which is called Baby Shoes. Apparently, Ernest Hemingway was lunching with numbers of writers and claimed that he could write a short story that was only 6 words long. And he told them to put $10 in to the middle of the table, and if he was wrong, he said he'd match it, but if he was right, he would keep the entire pot. He quickly wrote 6 words down on a napkin and passed it around and won the bet, and the words were, "For sale, baby shoes never worn, a beginning, a middle, and an end." Death is shown in this short story by the ending where it says "never worn," because it symbolizes how the people behind the ad, or the couple behind the ad, either had a miscarriage or stopped trying to have a kid and therefore sell the shoes. Now we're going to compare the two texts. We compared the two texts and concluded that death is shown in two completely different ways, with Hughes talking about suicide and Hemingway talking about miscarriage. In Hughes' poem, death seems to be the only good thing in this cold world, and in Hemingway's short story, death comes unexpected. The people behind the ad did not expect to deal with death by selling the shoes, and therefore death came by surprise. They both end with a cliffhanger and puts the reader in a situation where he or she can decide what happens next.
Now we want to include the third text by Robert Browning. It's a poem called Prospice, and I want to compare it to the two others. The basic question that opens the poem is fear death, and Robert Browning questions this because he wants the reader to consider if there even is a reason why you should fear death. He wrote the poem shortly after his wife passed away in 1861, and therefore, compared to the two other poems, you can say that the lyric speaker actually is the writer himself, because he's talking directly to his wife. This poem does, just like the two others, deal with the theme death, as I said before. However, this poem refers to death in a different way. The lyric speaker is a fighter, and he wants to give in his last strength before he dies. He wants everyone to face death bravely, and turns the disadvantage of dying into an advantage by saying that it's God's will, and therefore there's nothing to be afraid of. The title of the poem, Prospice, fits perfectly with the poem because it means to look forward, and the lyric speaker looks forward and sees death clearly. He doesn't deny that he's going to die someday.
So to sum up this project, we see death in 3 different ways, and that shows how people can view death in different ways.